everyone, and welcome to the third episode of the Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities presents Hometown Haunts. I am your host, Kat Klockow, and tonight with me I have Christina Wald and Jen Koehler. Good night, or good evening, ladies.
Good night.
Hello.
It is good night.
It is good night.
Oh, yes.
I mean, for hauntings,
It is a good night for hauntings. It's wonderful weather here in Cincinnati today. It's been a very long day because our Kickstarter launched today.
Woo-hoo.
Yay! So you can go to Kickstarter and search for Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities.
So do we want to talk about the Kickstarter first and then do what's weird this week?
No, we can do our weird things.
Okay, let's do weird things.
I'm just saying that we're excited today.
We are excited. We are. It's been a long day, like preparing for the
very long
Kickstarter and doing all the video stuff and then, making flaming skulls. I said, that's the one thing I've learned from... And Jen had to hear me talking about making, because last night I said, I think I need to make something with flaming skulls.
Our flaming skull needs a name.
It does. I'm going to make a sticker with it. And
Kelly.
Kelly.
Billy. Sam.
So viewers, if you have, please, can you put like the GIF of him or her? Yeah,
people can see our flaming
have them bumping around the screen. And for you viewers and listeners, we need a name for this flaming skull. So if you have a suggestion,
like our mascot.
It could be our mascot. I know Astonishing Legends has Astonishing Al, who's also a skull, but he's wearing headphones. So, but you can send them to our email, which is cincycuriosities.
cincycuriosities@gmail.com. So CINCY curiosities@gmail.com.
But if you have a name suggestion for our wonderful flaming skull,
yes,
please send it there.
Well, that's part of our art trope is that if you are doing fantasy art, if it's not working, add a skull, and if it's still not working, add a bunch of skulls, and if it's still not working, add a dragon.
Yeah,
so, aspiring artists, if you're wondering the true trick to making your best art, it's more skulls.
I don't know how many times I use that in Witches and Sorcerers doing the Sorcerer's Alchemy room. And I'm just like, how can I make this look more spooky? Oh, well, we need a skull candle somewhere. The candle stuck in the skull or like a raven or something like that, just to give that spooky ambiance of magic is happening here.
Exactly. So, you can never go wrong with a bunch of skulls. I mean, it's just sort of the ultimate. I don't know if is there a writing equivalent of that, Jen?
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot. Full moon?
Oh yeah, there we go.
That's true.
Or
that's
dark
true.
and stormy night.
Yeah.
But that brings me to Christina and the weird stuff I saw this week segment.
Yes.
We need like a little jingle. It's like, weird stuff we saw this week.
Hey, I like that. That works. I was thinking about making a logo for it.
There we go.
Which I might, when I'm cutting it together.
Yes.
Maybe with something flaming, just because, since I learned how to make things, have flames and After Effects, now I want to do it on everything.
I've learned how to set things on fire.
Exactly.
Digitally.
There's got to be like people that are into video that has to be. It's kind of like in graphic design when somebody uses too many drop shadows or gradients in their type. Like
I'm looking at you,
type
J.J. Abrams, and all your lens flares throughout Star Trek.
It's like a stage you go through when you're working on video that you want everything to have that.
You need air horns everywhere.
But yeah, speaking of that, was skulls is a good segue because
you got stories about them.
Well, I always like reading Boing Boing. It had a thing on, I guess there was an article in the Atlantic. There's a surprising amount of laws about not just human remains, but skulls. And
people love skulls.
Yes, and this is from an Atlantic article. It says, in the United States, no federal law prevents owning, buying, or selling human remains unless the remains are Native American. Otherwise, whether you're able to sell or own remains is decided in each individual state. So you never knew states' rights involved the ownership of skulls.
I did know it had to do with like burying people on your own property.
Burying on your property, a lot of that has to do probably with funeral homes and graveyards, although there probably are some health issues if you had too many people buried on your property. So
Yeah,
maybe that's a serious.
this is the water hole.
But it says at least 38 states have laws that should prevent the sale of human remains, but in reality the laws are vague, confusing, and enforced at random. In one 7-month period in 2012 to 13, 454 human skulls were listed on eBay with an average opening bid of just under $650. I mean, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to talk about how you treat a, skull before you sell it and deflesh it, all this stuff that actually is
Beetles.
Yes, that's what it says. They use defleshing
Beetles.
Yeah, well, isn't there a place where they do research and they use different types of beetles and stuff like that to clean off?
Yeah, they have the body farms. Different universities
that's what
and
it is,
colleges
yeah.
have body farms. The Museum of Osteology, which is just south of Oklahoma City, wonderful place. I highly suggest you go there. They have a huge display of the beetles actually taking the flesh and off of bones that are brought in. So yeah, I loved it. Mike was queasy, but I loved it.
There's so much.
It sounds a little bit vomit inducing. Yes.
It's just little bugs that are just taking bits of what looks like jerkied meat off of a bone at that point. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it dries out as it just sits in a dry climate. So
true.
True. When I was young, my parents sent me to a natural history museum camp in Cincinnati.
Oh, fun.
Things we got to learn, and that was taxidermy.
Oh,
which is kind of an unusual thing to do at camp. We each got a frozen mouse and we're taught how to make it into like a stuffed mouse. Mine looked really terrible. I sewed up its face crooked. My crafting skills weren't really peak when I was, that young. And it disappeared.
Still have it?
No, I think there's two options. We had a bunch of cats, so either a cat shredded it or my mom threw it away or both. It's probably a combination of both. But they said if you were good at taxidermy, which is also kind of like sculpture, that you could make a good living.
Yeah.
If you're really good at dealing with that. But
yeah,
that involves like, cutting. I guess it's a little bit quease inducing too.
So new challenge for all our listeners. Please send us fan art of the taxidermied mouse that Christina made in elementary school.
I can't remember what year. I'll have to ask how old I was. Probably in the junior high-ish sort of.
So taxidermied mouse. Everyone.
I know. I don't know if that's still a thing in camp, but that almost sounds like an Addams Family camp or something.
I dissected owl pellets in my Girl Scout camp, and
that's cool.
That I loved. I love owls, so it's just like, sure, your vomit pellets, just give them to me. I want to see what kind of mice you've been eating.
Exactly.
But I remember in my house growing up, we had one of those window wells, and shrews would get stuck in them, and shrews and frogs. So I would do my best to save them, but if they expired, I would take them out and dissect them.
Ooh.
So, yeah.
Fascinating.
Very Wednesday.
Very, yeah. My dad was like, yeah, this is fine, because he would take me fishing, and, like, you're filleting fish as soon as you get them back to the dock, and he was fine with it. He was also an avid hunter. My mom was just like, no. So, but I never taxidermied them. I just kind of took went woo, and then they disappeared because we also had cats.
Yeah.
Speaking of cats, that's my cat bringing down his stuffed animal. He heard us talking about mice and stuff. So Jen had a build on the skulls thing too. You were talking about a friend who sold skulls, or
not a friend. That's a
great segue. Not a friend.
Not a friend.
Well, no, I like people that like creepy things, obviously.
Hi.
But I went into this oddity shop in Florida, and I'm drawing a blank on the name of the town, but I was buying a skull plate just had an enameled plate or whatever. And I happened to mention to the guy checking me out, and I'm like, I like skulls. And he's like, oh, I like skulls. And then he pulls out his phone and shows me a picture of the shelving that he had just built for his skull collection, his human skull collection. And they were there, sitting there in a row. I mean, he had at least 9 of them, I think, 6 or 9. And I was just like, okay, that's cool. Don't know if I could have that in my house. And if I was dating a guy and walked in 2, that would scare me. But you could just tell he just had this really cool fascination with bones and medical stuff. And he and my friend I was with actually hit it off, and they just started going off about things. And he just kind of looked at us. You just know when you find a kindred soul that likes those things. And he was excited to talk about it. Mm-hmm. But I asked him, how do you acquire a human skull? Right. You can just happen to find one. I've heard of people finding them.
Maybe those should be reported to the proper authorities.
And I think sometimes they have been.
Yeah.
But then they're like, we don't want it. We can't do anything with it. It's not foul play, so then they get to keep the skull. And he was just kind of cagey about how he acquired his, because he said he'd just gotten one from overseas. And I'm like, yeah, okay.
There's a lot about that.
It was an interesting experience, I'd have to say.
Yeah. It's I'm going to say ask a mortician, who is a very popular YouTuber, who is an actual mortician. I believe she has broached this topic before.
Okay.
So I may direct people to go watch that, because she explains it much better than I think anybody else could. But a lot of skulls that get sold were once a part of somebody else, mainly from China, and may not have gotten appropriately acquired. So kind of like the bodies exhibits that go around. You have to wonder where the bodies came from and who they were. So there's a lot of ethical questions about where these skulls are coming from, and how much they're going for, and all that. And then, especially with Native American artifacts, not just material artifacts, also bones and stuff, where they're getting found. You find random burial pits around the United States and Canada, and just going, well, who does this go to? Cultural resource management? Does this go to the authorities? Who do these remains belong to? And then ultimately they should be buried in a pauper cemetery.
Yeah.
But
well, my mind immediately goes to serial killer.
Yeah.
Although I guess you wouldn't probably display the skulls and then show them to random strangers.
There's a little bit of a Dexter feel to the man that you just described.
Exactly.
Little tiny bit.
And then, Kat, you had your you visited your hacienda.
Oh yes, I visited my hacienda on a completely non-skull related topic. So if you remember, a few weeks back I talked about my hometown haunting, which was the Hacienda Mexican restaurant, which was the former Cam Mansion in Mishawaka, Indiana. Well, I had the opportunity to go up to Mishawaka just to visit, and managed to take a very quick walk around the property. I did not go inside the building. It's already been gutted and renovated, so the original mansion feel is no longer there, but the exterior is still there. So I did take some video and some photos. Some of them I posted on my Instagram, of the old K&S brewery building, which is for sale if anyone is interested. Hey. And the funny thing I did not realize is that when I was a senior in high school, my senior portrait photographer was in one of the offices that is now in the K&S brewery building. So
wow.
Yeah, and there is a local brewery, and I unfortunately did not look it up before getting on tonight, but there is a Mishawaka brewery that has taken over the main area of the building and the iconic smokestack. And then also the dog that is with me is Chewbacca, aka Chewy, my little paranormal pooch.
Aw.
So today, which is October 5th, is when we're recording this, our Kickstarter launched for this Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities Comics Anthology issue number 1. And it's a 36-page comic anthology that we have been working on since February with local artists around the Cincinnati tri-state area. And it highlights local folklore of Cincinnati, Indiana, and, well, not so much Kentucky this time, I guess, but the Ohio River, which touches Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean, you could say we touch Kentucky with the Vivi, Indiana story of Jay's.
Yes, Vivi. We are sorry to everyone. Jay pronounces it Vive throughout every interview that we did. I love Jay. We have let him know that it's pronounced Vivi. We know it's Vivi. But
I didn't know until somebody from my writers group mentioned it.
Oh yeah. I love you, Indiana. You mispronounce every single foreign name ever.
We've had a really exciting day. We've done really well. This is my first Kickstarter I've ever run. So,
Yes,
I wasn't sure what to expect. Yeah. I didn't think we'd fund it in a day.
No.
But, I think that it's very realistic, and
Yeah.
it's a great book. So I hope everybody wants it. Because I even learned stuff from it.
Yeah, it focuses on 6 area locations. So those are the Loveland Frogman, the Loveland Castle, Satan's Hollow, which Christina worked on, Music Hall, Sedamsville Rectory, and Mermaids of the Ohio River, which is what Jay worked on. Or Sedamsville Rectory. We haven't been corrected yet, so...
But we will be.
We will be. But yeah, so Sedamsville, that is my location. And then the one that we're talking about tonight is Music Hall, which is an iconic music hall. It's where the opera, I believe, is in part in the ballet, and it's really the cultural center of Cincinnati and has been for
symphony, opera,
40 years. Yeah.
Sometimes artists.
The interior pages are all black and white. Our exterior pages are color. Those would be our covers. Our front cover was done by Tom Miller, and our back cover was done by Eamon Hill. All of us are local. We have 13 different tiers that people can choose from, from $1 tier to $300. I know myself and Christina, we're doing sketches. There's a tier where you can get sketches from us. I'd be really excited if you request monsters, because I like drawing monsters, but people can request what sketches they want from us.
Yes,
correct?
Because I'm going to be, somebody has already gotten one of the watercolor sketches. So
nice.
I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing yet, but I'm excited to do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, we've got, the book's really good, and we're hoping to really have a couple stretch goals, because we plan to do this every year, and hopefully next year's book will be maybe have a couple extra stories, have some 1-page cryptid pinups.
Yes.
And make it a little bit bigger each year. This is sort of our inaugural launch, so obviously we want it to be a little bit bigger and better each year, and there are quite a lot of places on your dossier that we didn't cover yet, so and I'm sure our listeners will have great ideas of places we can include in our book.
We've even been getting suggestions just doing the interview scene.
Yes.
Basically the book signing tour that we're doing right now. But for those of you who are curious, there is a $10 pledge. There's either the Ghost Hunter or the Ghost in the Machine Hunter.
That's to get only digital. So
that's what I was going to say. There's the Ghost Hunter one, which is $10, is the digital edition plus the print edition, and then Ghost in the Machine Hunter is digital with a digital wallpaper and a name on the thank you page, and it goes up from there. There's also a $1, like I said. But,
we because shipping has gotten exorbitantly expensive, and also because of changing laws with the EU and with Brexit and stuff like that. Unfortunately, I didn't put a tier for international stuff, but you can get the books digitally. You don't where we don't ship them, we just send you a digital version of the book, because right now shipping and customs forms is a little bit of a nightmare. I occasionally sell my artwork overseas, and there's quite a lot of forms that you have to fill out. And we will have a link to our Kickstarter page, plus we have our Kickstarter video on our YouTube page now, so you can watch it. It has interviews with everyone and shows the art. It's a really exciting book. We're already getting people asking if they can be in the second book, and definitely when we fund this, hopefully we'll have enough beyond to really, we kind of have talked about maybe even starting the art early and kind of gradually showing it off through the year, and then having it culminating in the next Kickstarter next year in October.
Yeah. So the campaign starts today, October 5th, 2020. It goes till November 2nd, 2020. And it features 6 stories from the Cincinnati tri-state area done by all Cincinnati local artists. It's a great way, just a gateway into folklore. If you just really love regional stories, you don't have to be from Cincinnati to enjoy these stories. The Loveland Frogman is quite internationally known, as well as the Loveland Castle. And Sedamsville Rectory, or Sedamsville Rectory, has been on many, many different paranormal shows. So it's really a great anthology. We worked really hard for it. And I encourage everyone to pick up a copy. It's 36 pages, and there's a whole lot of fun goodies that you can also request in the different tiers.
We're really proud of this, and it kind of was what made this podcast possible. So
yes,
and
we just wanted to keep talking about it.
Exactly. And actually in today's episode, we're going to show a little bit of the interview with Brandon about Music Hall 2, because through his story, I had never heard of the steamer explosion.
Yeah, that was something that I learned too. That was new, because I'm not from Cincinnati, and the idea of a steamboat exploding on the Ohio River is quite terrifying. And body parts just raining down on people.
Well, apparently steamboat,
like a terrible meat shower.
Apparently steamboats really had that problem quite a bit. There's another local author that wrote a book about a steamboat explosion, and the book that I was talking about was about the explosion of the Sultana. And that happened in Marietta, and
Ohio.
Marietta, Ohio. And the Sultana was a steamboat carrying prisoners of war back home from the Civil War, and it blew up. And the number of dead was higher than who died on the Titanic. And so local author Kathy Weechman wrote a book about it called Like a River. And that's another story where when she wrote it, people were like, I never heard of this story before, yet so many people died from it.
Well, I know a lot of steam locomotives exploded, and those are fascinating photos to find in old archives. And Ohio is full of accidents like that. So,
well, they were probably unregulated pressure cookers that were driving. I mean, in the time of everything turning into a brewery, like you were describing the hacienda, one thing that's become popular recently is distilling your own liquor. And one reason that it's slightly illegal is because it's slightly explosive. And
your house go boom.
Exactly. Basically, a distillery is a bomb that will blow up if you aren't careful. And so that's why things like that need to be somewhat regulated, or, you get injured or killed by that. So, and actually
support our Kickstarter, everyone.
Yeah, support our Kickstarter. We've gotten really dark here.
Yeah.
So
speaking of dark things, we should just move right on over to the Cincinnati Music Hall. Okay. So, Cincinnati Music Hall. It is the heart of the Cincinnati arts community here, and it is also one of the most haunted locations in the United States. It has been on different, just haunted lists, haunted location lists, haunted locales, anything that is, every time Halloween comes creeping around Music Hall, there is something written up about Music Hall. It is one of the most iconic facades in all of Cincinnati. Its Gothic face has looked over Washington Park and the Over the Rhine neighborhood for over 140 years. However, the land that it sits on has a very tumultuous past, which has led to the monolithic building to be home to a few ghosts. In 1821, the 4-acre piece of land west of Elm Street and north of 12th Street became home to Ohio's first insane asylum, the Commercial Hospital and Lunatic Asylum of Ohio, which also was the parent hospital for the Orphan Asylum, the City Infirmary, the Cincinnati Hospital, and Longview Asylum. After 1832, a cholera outbreak happened in Cincinnati, and a portion of the land was made into a pauper cemetery and was used for that purpose for the next 25 years. This is where the remains of those 150 people who died in the ill-fated Moselle steamer were buried after the 1838 explosion on the Ohio River. As we mentioned, when the steamer exploded, their bodies were shredded apart, burned, and fell on top of the city. And that would have been messy cleanup. Sorry, that's just editorializing right there. As the Cincinnati Commercial wrote, which was a newspaper back in 1838, when the steamer Moselle exploded her boilers above the site of the present waterworks and blew the skulls and limbs of blackened trunks of her passengers all over the city, so that the falling bodies fell through the roofs of houses, the remains of the victims were gathered together and buried in a spot now covered by the south end of the Horticultural Hall. According to neighborhood lore, this is when ghosts started haunting around Elm Street and continue to this day. When city encroachment made it unsuitable for the land to be used as a pauper's field and pest house, the previous tenants, both alive and dead, were relocated outside of city limits, the dead being moved to Spring Grove Cemetery. In 1859, the city of Cincinnati converted the property into Elm Street Park, with the park hosting expositions of all sorts until 1876, when the park was turned over to a music hall association and construction started. Of course, construction turned up hundreds of human remains and will continue to do so with every renovation to this day. The 1927 renovation uncovered 3 coffins that were reburied in the basement, and then another 65 graves, earning the side of the music hall the nickname Valley of Death. Those remains were also reburied on site. In May 1988, another elevator shaft uncovered 207 pounds of bones encased in concrete. These bones ended up in an anthropological study at the University of Cincinnati. The first performance of the new music hall was on May 14th, 1878, with the North and South Exposition Halls being completed September 2nd, 1879. Ever since, those who work on the building late at night have heard phantom footsteps knocking from both the ceiling and the floor, the sounds of crashing timbers or glass breaking when nothing is amiss. Even seen the eerie form of a shrouded woman afloat in the prop room in the building's sub-basement. Both guests and performers alike have witnessed phantom patrons in the old box seats, heard unearthly music playing from the hall, and the box office has reported windows will ding to alert staff that somebody is there to purchase tickets, only find no one standing in front of the box office. I also have seen a ghost at the Cincinnati Music Hall. I know this wasn't included in our interview with Brandon, but I believe I saw the former conductor of the Cincinnati Orchestra when I did the ghost hunt back in 2011, because he had previously died like a year or two beforehand. So I can go into a little bit of that ghost story.
Yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yeah. All right. So I was actually, it was around 2011, and I went to a convention called the Queen City Paracon. And the big attraction to this convention was being able to actually ghost hunt or paranormal investigate the Cincinnati Music Hall. And this was when I was able to go all the way to the very bottom basement, which actually is the ground floor of the building, where you can, if you walk on the dirt, you're just seeing pieces of bone sticking out left and right. You can tell that they were never really, they've tried to rebury, but it being a pauper cemetery, corpses were just thrown into burial pits of various depths, so they're still finding bodies, even in Washington Park across the street. So we were in the middle of the ghost hunt. I'm sitting on the balcony looking down at the stage, and this is before the renovation happened. And it's myself and then a few other paid patrons of this convention, and then Jeff Belanger, and I think it was not the Ghost Brothers, it was before them. It was the Kling Brothers, I think, were some of the guests at this particular event. And they were all scattered all around the audience area. Some were in the old box seats, some of them were in the balcony with me, and some of them were on the ground floor looking at the stage. And it was not terribly late at night, maybe 9 or 10. And we're sitting in this dark, dimly lit theater staring at the stage, and it has what they call the ghost light on the stage, which is just a light so that you don't kill yourself falling off of the stage when all the rest of the lights are off. And out from, it must have originated from underneath the balcony, but that main not alleyway, the walkway from the lobby all the way to the stage, something just appeared, and it looked like a man. He was translucent but kind of gray, shimmery silver, wearing a sports jacket. And he actually didn't have legs, but I saw his shoulders in his sports jacket and his short cropped hair. And I watched him very quickly float from the very back of the theater all the way to the stage. And as soon as he hit where the orchestra would have sat for the ballet or for the opera, he just evaporated. And I know at least 2 other people there that night witnessed this apparition basically float down the center aisle of Cincinnati Music Hall. Very bizarre. Talking to people who work in the construction of the props department is very haunted. They have witnessed what looks like a woman's body float out of the floor in a decaying burial shroud that the paupers' bodies would have been put into. And she'll just float out and then just kind of float away around on the floor. And she's been seen a few times by the person that I have talked to. There are a lot of shadow people. I know that have been witnessed throughout the building. Phantom singing, phantom clapping, and then the elevator shaft in the southern exposition hall is actually the first thing I ever learned was very haunted at that location. And people have heard banging and clawing and scratching from outside the elevator shaft, like people are trying to get into the elevator. And yeah, that's Cincinnati Music Hall. Washington Park, right across the street, is also extremely haunted. People have seen ghosts float through there, even before it was turned into a park. There are 3 or 4 headstones still erect, actually, just across from Cincinnati Music Hall in Washington Park. If you visit, it's going to be where the dog park is, and right next to the dog park are 3 original headstones. And it's rumored that from this pauper cemetery, a lot of body snatching was happening for the University of Cincinnati for their doctors in training. So yeah, that's also rumor. So Cincinnati was known for body snatching in the Midwest, besides Chicago. Yeah, Christina's laughing. So yeah, that is my ghost story from Cincinnati Music Hall. I highly urge people to go visit, especially when it opens. They just renovated the building. It finished in 2017, and it's beautiful. It's huge. I know in Washington Park we do a whole bunch of different fairs. There's a crafty supermarket that's there. There's a Cincinnati Flea, which is our huge trendy flea market. It's just a really big core of the Over the Rhine neighborhood, which the Over the Rhine neighborhood gets its own episode because it is also super haunted.
Oh, exciting, because I'd like
Yeah.
to hear more about that. Now, Jen, you have some articles you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I found these in the Inquirer archives today. So I'm just going to read small quotes from them. This is from a story from October 31st, 1996.
Whee!
Written by Mark Kernut. And it's the title of the article is History Museum's annual tour includes 16 stops on ghastly side of the city. And it opens with this paragraph. And I apologize ahead of time for any mispronunciations of words and names. So here you go. Music hall manager Tom Backenset was in the ballroom with 2 cleaning crew members on one day this summer when a door opened, then closed very slowly. The swinging door had nothing to do with a gust of wind. Music hall, legend has it, is haunted. Its ghosts are the spirits of people buried in 2-century-old cemeteries now beneath the building. Quote, it's always been a creepy place, hall events manager Tom Caper says. Late at night, you hear all sorts of things. So that's one.
Yeah. I will say now being next to the big restaurant and bar district, you're going to hear all sorts of things since I'm at Cincinnati Music Hall.
Oh, good. I guess I never really realized how haunted it was.
Oh, yeah. Well, it like the old lunatic asylum, you have from just my experience of historic haunted places I've been to, places with a lot of trauma tend to create a lot of hauntings.
Yeah.
And just the properties that had been in that 4-acre area saw so much trauma throughout history for different reasons. And yeah, it causes a lot of ghosts, especially really late at night. And
do you think the District 1 police station across the street is haunted too?
Probably.
Well, there's so many beautiful old buildings in Over the Rhine with really interesting histories. You know, when I was talking to Jeff for our Inquirer article, he was talking about some locations that we could cover, and a lot of it is like stuff would get left around and people would make stories about it and that sort of thing.
Well, there's a building that is on, oh man, it's near where Taste of Belgium is.
Oh,
there, I could point it out. There was a murder-suicide in the building, and the property managers have reported that their tenants have reported lots of odd going-ons, like doors opening, like poltergeist activity, basically. Doors opening and closing, TVs turning on and off, flipping channels, pipes being banged, pipes break, like things that are more extensive than just it being an old building. And you'll have the same issue happening from tenant to tenant to tenant in the same apartment where it happened. So it's a beautiful building. All of those buildings, well, a lot of them are being restored for good or for bad. But
it stirs things.
It stirs things whenever that happens. So do you have
Yeah.
more articles?
I have, I think, one more, and this was from a December 6, 2015 article by Janelle Galfand, and it's titled Packing Up to Preserve a Musical Treasure. So it's basically interviewing Mary Judge, the CSO's principal librarian, as they were packing up for the renovation.
Right.
So this is her story. Mary Judge regularly works into the wee hours at Music Hall. As she walks through its halls, another memory surfaces. My very first ghost experience was with Eric Kunzel. It was 3 a.m. and we were working on fixing some Pops arrangements, she recalled. It was the middle of July and it was so hot, there was no air ventilation. It was awful. Her phone rang and Kunzel asked her to come to his office. So I move into the hallway and all of a sudden I'm covered in my personal air conditioning. It was really nice. I take a step, I stop, and it stops. I'm going down the hall in my personal air conditioner, she said. I go into Eric's room and cross the threshold and it stops and stays in the hallway. I left his office and I was surrounded again until I stepped back into the library. She doesn't know if music hall's ghosts will follow them or be there when they return. I've always felt that the spirits that roam here never threaten. She said, they just roam, end quote.
Yeah, that goes with all the reports that I've heard.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was kind of like a caregiving, taking care of her.
I mean, when I cut together the video on Music Hall, that's on our YouTube channel, I found a picture from the library of the old asylum. And it was interesting because that's one thing where I talk about learning about the area, because you know it's really hard to find. I mean, obviously they had to be drawings of stuff. There wasn't cameras back then. And one thing that's interesting about Cincinnati is it has been inhabited for a very long time. And so there are a lot of interesting stories, like the cholera epidemic, and you said like the paupers cemetery. And even, you know, up until recent years, where before they renovated Washington Park, it was sort of like a derelict.
It's very sad, but it happened.
Yeah, it was. And one wonders if the reason it was so bad was part of that bad feeling kind of seeping in.
It could have been. It did see a low point in its history where there was still a lot of traumatic events happening there. They were just a different flavor than in a insane asylum. You're going to have so there was a lot of homelessness, there still is, and transient people that were living in those areas. And which is just a flip from when a lot of Over the Rhine was beer halls and restaurants, which is starting to turn back into again.
Hopefully it will come back after COVID.
Yeah, Prohibition really killed that area. So Brandon Wagner, local Cincinnati artist.
Hello.
You have lent your talents to this massive undertaking of a story about the Cincinnati Music Hall. Why did you choose the Cincinnati Music Hall to cover for our anthology?
Funny enough, I knew about Cincinnati Music Hall before I started learning about the wonderful haunted mysteries that abound in its halls. I performed there with my high school choir once with for I believe a Christmas show. And it was a wonderful time. I got to see the inside from like the stage perspective, and it is an absolutely gorgeous piece of architecture. So I had that in my belt loops from just being able to take part of that. But unfortunately, I didn't get the chance to explore it too late at night to get a chance to see anything eerie or slimy. But after learning extensively about the past of the building through my online research and also through a current exhibit that's going on in the museum where I work as security, I learned a lot about like the land that the building was placed on and the paupers field, and I, stemming from that, then just like the plethora of red string just comes out of the woodwork, and I start making pieces together, just like, oh yeah, the people from the Moselle steamer explosion would obviously be buried in a place where they couldn't identify bodies.
Because they were unidentifiable.
Because they were just shreds. It's like, what are you going to do? So yeah, I easily fell in love with that aspect and stuff like that. Like haunted music halls, a wide cast of characters that float through it. Yeah, I instantly fell in love with that premise.
Yeah, I learned a lot just getting the dossier ready for this project, because I didn't know about the Moselle steamer explosion. I knew about the Cincinnati Music Hall. I knew about it being on a pauper cemetery because I had seen shows about it when I was living in Indiana. So moving here, I'm like, yeah, the Cincinnati Music Hall's haunted, but did not know about the steamer explosion.
Yeah.
So learning about that from your comic, I was just like, that's just an entire level of crazy that I didn't expect. and just more and more literally raining down onto the city.
Yeah, I discovered that that was like one of the first things I found when I was looking into like music hall, and it just like directed me to that, and I was like, how are these connected? Oh, this is like 20 years before the museum was built.
Yeah.
Like before like the whole exposition hall was built.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really fascinating. It was also interesting to discover that the exposition halls held like essentially what would end up being the World's Fair in Chicago for years before it was adapted into a performance stage.
Yeah, that was really interesting, just learning about how all these major cities had exposition halls and areas, and then the World's Fair coming around. And the one in Chicago is just particularly well known because of H.H. Holmes. So
yeah.
stalking everyone in his murder castle.
Oh, what are you gonna do?
So there's a lot of history with the Cincinnati Music Hall. How did you manage to condense it the way that you did? You put it into 6 pages.
Yes.
It's wonderfully illustrated, black and white, like they're Penny Dreadfuls from the Victorian era.
Thank you very much. I wanted to kind of tell this like haunted mansion-esque story of getting the band back together. So
I like that.
So I had this idea of like, come foolish mortals and check out this wonderful show we have for you. We've got orphans in the basement. We've got that ghost in the rafters. And we've got the main attraction, the woman in white, wafting through the halls and scaring the security guards.
And since you are a security guard, you got like connection to that.
Yes, but in a contemporary art museum, you deal with a whole lot of different monsters.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I like how you used the stark black and white. Now, is this traditionally drawn, or is it digitally drawn?
I drew all 6 pages in Procreate on my iPad. Yes, okay. I absolutely fell in love with that software. I've been using it ever since. I've completely given up paper, and I'm kicking myself that I haven't started doing this sooner. It is such a drastic change in work ethic, and I love every minute.
Yeah, I like it. I like Procreate, and a lot of the more recent programs have managed to mimic how ink spreads on paper a lot better than before. So Procreate's pretty good for that. There's a few others, like Adobe Fresco is also awesome for its watercolors. So yeah, but I like how you put it all together, and it flows so well. And it like going back to the Mosul exploding, you get to see limbs raining down on people in such a cartoony fashion.
Yeah, it was such like a drastic opening. To like start off. I wanted to do that first so that people would be like, wait, this is about music hall? I'd be like, wait a second.
There's so much history. And I remember, have you ever done one of the ghost hunts, either in music hall or around Washington Park at OTR?
No, not an OTR. I did take a ghost tour in cemetery. I've already forgot, Spring Grove.
Yeah,
Spring Grove.
It's our lovely cemetery.
It's actually very beautiful.
It is. It's a sculpture cemetery.
Yes.
So, like Mount Auburn in Boston.
Yes, and a lot of big Cincinnati names as well, like Procter and Gamble are like parked across a lake from each other. Yes. I don't know if that was by design.
Just waving at each other.
Yeah, exactly.
How's the soap business, Procter? It's fine, Gamble.
It's fine. I'm dead. It's like my gravestone is a bench. Come say hi. One of them is, but there's so much history in the macabre side of Cincinnati.
Yeah, because Washington Park also was built on part of this pauper cemetery. And when they were building the garage that's underneath it now, they just were excavating all these bones. And the pauper cemetery, it's rumored, was one of the favorite places for the University of Cincinnati to do body snatching.
Of course.
So Cincinnati has a very healthy history of body snatching corpses for for all the medical students. It's just a rumor.
Of course.
It's just a rumor.
A lot of aspiring Frankensteins.
Yes. Have you seen, you mentioned before you haven't seen anything spooky at Music Hall.
No.
No.
I guess because I was always in a crowd, no one came out. But I did get a chance to rehearse there in the dark, and it is very eerily quiet. Like, it's because looking back on it now, I wish I checked the upper rafters a bit more to look for like the Box 9 ghost, the famous Box 9 ghost, when after it was originally turned into a music stage, the owner brought his son at the time to check out the place, and the son points to Box 9 and says, "Look, there's a man, he's waving at me." And by the time he looks up, there's no one there. And I love that story, so I had to include him in my excerpt for the anthology.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's one of the really well-known ghost stories from Music Hall, which makes me wonder what's going to happen now that the box seats have all been removed.
Yes.
Yeah. So are we going to still see him? Did he disappear forever? Time will tell.
I like to hope they can adapt, but like we can.
They've been there for 140 years.
Right. Like, why stop now?
Yeah.
So next week, we're going to have Carrie Logan Houlihan. We're interviewing her on Thursday, and she has written a book called Creepy and True: Ghosts Unveiled. And we're going to interview her about that book. And she has a little bit of Cincinnati stuff, but this is actually worldwide hauntings. I think Kat had mentioned, she even talks about, you said some Japanese ghosts?
Yeah, she does talk about some Japanese ghosts like Okiku and the Well, and which is what The Ring's based off of.
Yes, so that should be interesting. And she has a couple pages on Music Hall too. So Music Hall really is sort of world renowned for its amount of haunting. Unfortunately, with COVID, I'm not sure if they probably are doing haunted tours because you don't have as many people on those, and they probably just take a limited number, not unlike the Dent schoolhouse. So I have a friend that went to one of those haunted tours a couple of years ago, and she got some really great pictures of orbs and said it was really creepy. I would love to see some of the hidden rooms there and check that out sometime. So maybe we'll have a visit there with our, a special edition Hometown Haunts visit there sometime.
That sounds good.
That'd be cool.
All right. So Mary wrote into Christina and shared her story from Independence, Missouri. And she writes, walking distance from President Truman's personal home in Independence, Missouri is another house of an era dating back to the 1850s. I was living in it for a very short time back in the 1970s. It was a 2-story home with a significant attic, such as was common in those days. There were often times when the entire family would be downstairs watching TV, doing homework, etc., when startling sound was heard by all of us. This happened more than once. It was as if a box of glass items fell and made the sound of a crash and shattering. We all jumped, and some of us would rush upstairs where we heard the noise coming from, thinking we would witness a floor full of glass shards, but there would be nothing. Not a toy, purse, makeup, nothing had fallen, and nothing of glass was on any of the shelves in the rooms. There would be other times when just 2 of us were home. On the first floor, we would hear water running. Following the sound, we would go together upstairs to find the faucet in the bathroom on full blast. Neither of us had been upstairs in a few hours, so we knew it was neither of us that had done it. The history behind the house, as told to me, was that originally it was a family home, but during the Civil War, it was used as a hospital. I do know that Independence was a border city between Kansas and Missouri, and both had guerrilla and regular troops, with the Confederate troops having a large number of guerrilla troops. There were 2 significant battles, one in 1861 and again in 1862. This house was used as a triage hospital during the battles. I am not sure which one specifically. The history then becomes foggy, with a mention of being a general store during the 1910s to the 1940s. The front of the house is set up to have street facing storefront windows, and somewhere in the 1950s to the 1970s, it was a halfway house for those released from the nearby jail. Then, my in-laws bought it in the late 1970s and started a dollhouse shop using the storefront for the business and living in the back sections and upstairs and doing restoration of the house. Now, the most disturbing incident as pertaining to this haunted house happened to me. At this time, I was 19 years old and was 6 months pregnant with my first child. I helped my mother-in-law with running the dollhouse business, and as happens when you are pregnant, it was common for me to take a nap around 2 p.m. My room was upstairs, and on this particular day, I had lain down and was not asleep because the baby was doing a lot of moving. I know I had closed my eyes and then opened them to find two people standing over me, a woman in a long dress and an apron, and a gentleman in a dark suit and no hat. I knew immediately that they were not of this current era. They were leaning over me, looking at my face, and then the man drew the sheet or blanket over my face and said, "This one is gone." I reached up to swipe the sheet off my face, but nothing was there, and the man and the woman had disappeared.
Wow.
Yeah, I sat up and looked around the empty room. I was alone. My in-laws made jokes of the broken glass sounds and the water running. They never believed me and my story. I told them of the man and the woman standing over me. They are my ex-in-laws as of 1984, and I can tell you that we never saw eye to eye on many topics. This haunting was only the first and should have been a hint of what would happen in just a short year later, but that is a different story.
Wow, that's intense.
Whoa.
That was a very intense story.
And again, the water.
Yeah.
You said that there is that because Charlie's story last week had a water connection. Is that there's a lot of stories of spirits traveling through water and water being.
Yeah, so water and the other side have a interesting connection. It depends on what culture you're a part of, but I will say a lot of ghosts tend to haunt around places with a lot of natural springs or a lot of natural flowing water. I can say from Japanese folklore, a lot of homes or castles will have bridges that have kind of a kink in them, so they would kind of look like a lightning bolt. And this was because ghosts at one point in Japanese theology can only travel going straight, as well as oni or ogres or demons, so that they would put this little kink in the bridge so that they can only go one direction, so they can never cross the water.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But being in Gettysburg, one of the most famous hauntings is at the bridge there, where you see troops, both Union and Confederate, crossing the waterway. So it's interesting how ghosts tend to be very active around water. And then looking back at Mexican folklore, you have La Llorona, who is a water ghost that will either pull you in or kill you on the banks of rivers. So
Wow.
yeah, there's a lot of ghost stories pertaining to water. A lot of poltergeist activity has to do with water, like faucets running. Running into poltergeist or ghostly activity with glass shattering. I've run into that in my own house growing up. It's really frustrating because you think a cat or something is broken glass, and you go run upstairs to see what it is and nothing is amiss. So it kind of shatters your nerves in a way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Look, a cat.
I know she likes being. Speaking of shattering nerves, she's trying a different tack. Instead of being on my Cintiq, she's on my scanner right now.
Oh.
But peeking in, she always likes to be involved. So we've had a lot of cat activity this episode.
Yeah, we have.
Cat and cat, right?
Yeah, cat. Not confusing at all.
But, this has been a great episode. Anyone else have anything in closing, or next week, send us more haunts. We love reading these stories. They're super interesting.
Yes.
And we're going to have our interview next week and back our Kickstarter.
Yes.
And, thanks for joining us again.
Yes. So for our social media handles. You can find us on YouTube with Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities. This is our Hometown Haunts podcast. You can find us on Twitter at cincycuriosities and also on Instagram at Cincy Cabinet of Curiosities. And on Facebook, it's just look for us at Cincinnati Cabinet of Curiosities. That's my screaming toddler. I hope everyone keeps spooky.
Yes. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good
Bye.
night.